How's it going, people? Salmon Slabber here, and this is part 3 of the Morytania campaign of Runescape Lore. So, in the last 2 parts, we covered the Morytania campaign itself, with the Saradominists, which were at the time currently set within Sentistan's remnants, decided to launch an offensive towards Draken to try and retake the Hallowland, which had recently just been taken by the Vampire Lord himself. We also covered, just after that, these 7 priestly warriors actually rose up and fought back against Draken as he started to invade Avarocca itself. So, in the last part, I did mention that I'd be carrying on and giving you more information on the Barrows Brothers themselves, as this was the time when the Barrows Brothers pretty much existed. This was the time the Barrows Brothers were actually alive, and they took part in the Morytania campaign and actually led the campaign itself straight to the walls of Draken himself. So we're going to carry on, and first we're going to go with a bit of an overview for those of you who either haven't seen the other parts or just to refresh your memory. So let's get started. The Barrows Brothers were an ancient race of Saradominists who established a reputation of near invincibility while fighting within the God Wars period. They launched a massive attack to try and liberate Morytania from the clutches of Lord Draken himself, as well as his vampire kind. This was because Draken had actually established complete control over the continent after the fall of Hallowvale itself, and the complete eradication of Saradominus' most valued followers, the Ician. As the Barrows Brothers departed, a mysterious stranger, which at the time was unknown, granted them superhuman power to battle Draken's forces, and it actually succeeded, for the brothers who were actually at the front line seemed to be invincible. They had not anticipated, however, that this mysterious stranger had very much ulterior motives for helping them. As the brothers and their accompanying army progressed further within the enemy territory in Morytania, this hooded stranger followed them until the brothers became weakened. The brothers at the time were grievously wounded in battle near the Great Firewall, and thus the army set up camp just west of Mayaditch itself. Soon, however, the brothers died of their infectious wounds. The army spent several days and nights holding off the attacking vampires to construct burial mounds, now known today as the Barrows, to honour their fallen brothers. The army after this quickly retreated from Morytania, realising they could never succeed without their former leader's prowess. As the army began its return, the hooded figure decided to cast a magical spell on the crypts, corrupting the bodies of the brothers. This then turned them into wights, and he then decided to bind them to guard a very powerful artifact. This hooded figure we now know today as Sliske. Sliske's ally Azanadra had requested for an icon to be guarded before Azanadra was imprisoned in the Geldrock Pyramid during the Third Age. This was so it could later be used to re-establish contact with the banished Zaros. Sliske, instead of directly taking the Barrows Brothers, decided it would be fun to have them almost succeed in their goal before claiming them, a typical characteristic of the Majara. In 169 of the 5th Age, Azanadra was finally released, and with the help of an adventurer who manages to steal the Barrows icon from the brothers, actually manages to re-establish communications with Zaros himself. This was just in time before the ritual of rejuvenation for the Majara. Shortly after said ritual, which the adventurer also attends with several Temple Knight allies, Sliske attempted to claim them in a similar way. However, the Saradominist priest Acrase Collium intercepted the spell, sacrificing himself and turning him into Acrase the Doomed, the 7th wight. Acrase, at that point, joined the Barrows Brothers within their crypt, although of course he isn't a fully fledged Barrows Brother himself. So that is a very good overview of what happened for the Morytania campaign. It is nice and brief, but covers the major facts quite nicely, gotta be said. But for those of you who actually want more, and have literally come to watch this video to find out a bit more on the Barrows Brothers and what they actually did in a bit more detail, there are 2 books which can be found. One is known as the Crumbling Tome, and this can actually be found upon searching the hut very near to where the actual barrows are found. The other is called the Fall of the Six. This can be found within Varroc's library. Today we're going to be covering the Crumbling Tome. The Crumbling Tome is also known as the Legend of the Brothers. As I said before, you can find it on a desk within the building just to the east of the entrance to the barrows. You can also obtain it by talking to the strange old man in the barrows himself. This book describes the story of the brave heroes that were buried here, and what brought them here, from beginning to the ultimate demise. So, let's get started with the Crumbling Tome, or the Legend of the Brothers. During the Great Wars, there were 6 brothers who fought side by side against the forces of evil. Their fervour in battle was awed and feared by all who saw them. Nothing is known of their origins, only that they were first seen when the legions of evil were pressing their hardest into civilized lands. It was the eldest who struck the first blow in that battle, hurling powerful battle magic into the enemy's ranks. This opening a hole for 4 others to charge through and into the heart of their forces. Little was seen or known of the 6th brother at this time. Only that when one of their brothers looked in danger, his foe would be felled by a shower of crossbow bolts. It wasn't until the dust had settled that those left could look on to their saviours. The 6 brothers who stood proud with the bodies of the fallen at their feet. For years, these brothers fought hard against the enemy, throwing themselves into battle with little regard for their own safety and relying only on each other for aid. Stories began to be told around campfires by soldiers of the feats they'd actually witnessed. They soon became legends long before end. Some say he'd always been there, but no one really knows for sure. The first real tale was after an incursion deep within the Darklands, where once again the brothers proved their worth. It was after the battle that a bent and robed figure was seen amongst the bodies of the dead. Most took him for a scavenger, but he moved towards the campfire of the brothers with such directness that some at first thought him another companion. The brothers, however, reacted as with suspicion at his approach, drawing their weapons and rising from their places. The stranger merely stood before them, as if he was sizing them up before turning and walking back into the mists. Some say that it's the first time they'd ever seen the brothers unsure. As the campaign moved deeper into the Darklands, the stranger appeared with greater frequency, often appearing on a rise near a battle and watching over it. The most disturbing thing was how his presence started to affect the brothers. They soon became distracted, and on occasion even receiving injuries that required attention. It was deep in the heart of the enemy's territory, in the falling light of dusk, that the enemy struck back. Great monstrosities swept through the camps, tearing at all in their path. Soldiers scattered like chaff in the wind before the onslaught. The brothers, valiant as ever, stood back to back before the enemy and fought with all of their might. As dawn broke, the enemy fled the battle, moving faster than any man could ever give chase. It was as the soldiers went about rebuilding the camp that the brothers collapsed at their fire camp. They lay as tough, yet breathing, muttering in strange tongues. Their injuries were found swollen and infected. None of the physicians knew what to do. It was like no infection they'd ever seen before. All through the day, the brothers were tended and cared for, while the soldiers waited nervously for their heroes to rise once more. It was then, just as the sun's last rays vanished before the horizon, that all hope was lost. As if perfectly on cue, all the 6 brothers sighed one last breath and died. It was only then that the stranger once again, standing on a rise just outside the camp. That night, the camp was surrounded by the great beasts of the enemy once more. But they didn't attack. They merely baited the soldiers to come out and meet them. Once again, at the break of dawn, the enemy fled without a trace, leaving the soldiers tired from a restless night of worry and fear. It was that day the commanders decided to turn back. They could advance no further without the brothers' aid. As was the custom at the time, out of honor and respect for the mighty fallen, they constructed 6 great barrows for the brothers. A crypt for each brother, covered in a small hill of earth that would hold their remains undisturbed by predators. The work took many days. For each night, the enemy returned, and the soldiers had to flee back within their camp, to wait away the night to the sounds of howling and scratching at the fences. But still, each day they resumed their work, their sense of duty to the brothers surmounting their fear of dark forces in the land. On the last day, the assembled troops buried the brothers inside their stone tombs. Then, with great reverence but little ceremony, they covered the tombs with earth. As the army broke camp and turned to march back to their lands, the stranger was once again standing atop the central barrow, standing tall against the failing light with his arms outstretched to the sky. Not many of the original army made it back to these lands. Many more had perished on the journey home. But tales were told of how each night an unnatural glow could be seen on the horizon where they once buried their brothers. Even today, there are stories told about these mounds of earth and the sights and sounds that have been witnessed nearby. So that is the book of the legend of the brothers. So as you can tell by the book, the brothers were revered by the army. They were literally the powerhouse of this campaign. They were the leaders, they were also the power, they were the trump card. And due to this stranger, for whatever reason, they became distracted and started to take injuries that weren't necessary, and because of this, it eventually led to their downfall. And at this time, and up to this date, there's been strange happenings where these brothers were once buried. So the other book that's available, you can find within Varrock Library. It's called The Fall of the Six. Unfortunately, we don't actually know who wrote this, but it's said that it's been adapted from the Cromwellian Tome, or the Legend of the Six, at the site of the Barrows. According to Reldo, I recently received a remarkable tattered manuscript from a strange old man who lives in the deepest, darkest Morytania. This scroll was evidently ancient, and contained an intriguing new angle on the famous legend of the Barrows. I'm not entirely sure of their significance, but the man signed his letter off with the words dig, dig, dig. Perhaps he has lived in Morytania for too long. So, let's get into this one then. This is a fully fledged story, so game on. Chapter 1. A Stranger Watches. The stranger had watched the campaign from its first footfall into the lands east of the river, but always from afar. His lidless eyes were affixed to the 6 commanders, resplendent in their armor, their weapons poised to attack as yet unmet foes. Behind each commander, a phalanx of war-hardened soldiers, their metallic armor glinting even in the pale light of these dead lands. Brilliant fingers of light inching towards the heart of Hallowvale. The 6 were brothers, hailing from one of the smaller townships of Mistalin. They had shown a glimmer of prowess in combat even back then, though their chores as farmers chewed up most of their time. They had been born in another age. Their lives would have been filled with thankless obscurity. But in this age, the age of the God Wars, there were many opportunities for such men to earn renown. Their thirst for fame is what led the stranger to them. For although their skills were unmatched in their township, they desired to be the best of all men, and the stranger had promised them this, for he knew power, and could also grant it. His long years had taken him to many distant lands where he had collected much arcane knowledge, and many artifacts of value and strength. And it was those very weapons and armors he had given to them that they now wielded, which granted them this desire. If they had not been blinded by such desires, had heard the deviousness in the stranger's voice, or could have seen the calculating eyes hidden deep within the dark recesses of his cowl, then they may have taken a different path. The campaign moved with great speed, deeper and deeper into the darkness. For a year, many battles were fought, like the one the stranger now watched below. The phalanxes engaged the rank and file, spurred on by the brothers' fearlessness and courage. While the brothers themselves squared up to the enemy champions, Arim, the eldest brother, crumbled his foes with powerful magic, and sapped their strength and their will to fight. Darak and Guthan, the next eldest, did not need their foes to be weakened to decimate them. Great axe cleaving limbs from bodies, and the spear skewering organs. The brothers were strongest when united, fighting side by side or back to back. Should any enemy manage to survive long enough and have the chance to strike a blow, Carol would fire a swathe of bolts to pepper their chest as they took their swing, throwing them back. This battle was the campaign's most unrelenting and bloody. The brothers' confidence and skills had grown over the years as the power they wielded made them feel invincible. It made them living heroes to their followers. The straggling enemy survivors were routed, but even they were cut down. Try as they might to flee, Torag pounded them into the dirt, and their prayers rang hollow as Virak flailed the skin from their bones. Yet another victory for the Barrows. A thin smile slowly curled upon the stranger's mouth, snagged teeth protruding, and he thought, truly, they are worthy. Now is the time. Before he slowly and deliberately turned heel and made his way down from his cliff, to perch to the battlefield's remnants below, and the camp the brothers' army was now constructing. Chapter 2. The Pact Fulfilled. Dusk had settled by the time he arrived at the camp. There was much song and laughter, rejoicing of the day's battle, and stories of valor. Various beasts were slowly roasting on spits over open fires. The crackling lost among the din of celebration, sparks dancing in the cool half-light. He picked his path through the piles of litter of the camp, but his path was always directly towards the brothers. As more became aware of his presence, a silence enshrouded the camp, as if the stranger himself were holding their mouths shut. To the surrounding army, it looked no more than the robed stranger staring into each of the brothers' eyes. But, to the brothers, it was the realization of their fate. They froze, in unison. as if caught in the path of a crushing wall of water, finally understanding the cost of the deal they had struck with this stranger. Misthalin now felt so very far away. A different land, a different time. The brothers, once united by blood and by bloodshed, and by the pact they had taken together, now stood alone. Their power had separated them from other mortal men. Now it had separated them from each other. The silent stranger's message could be heard only in the brothers' minds. A raspy, conspiratorial whisper. "The time has come, my warriors. The gifts I bestowed upon you have served you well, and you, in return, have served your god. Now, it is time to begin your servitude to me, to my god. You shall stand ever vigilant for his return, and then you will be champions in his glorious army. We shall have victory against the usurper, but first, you must die." The brothers flinched back, hands tightening on weapons, but the stranger did not attack. After this briefest of moments, to the onlooking soldiers a lifetime to the brothers, the stranger turned and strode to the edge of the camp, back through the charred remains of the defeated and the victorious dead. The brothers just stood and watched, in shock, as the odd figure disappeared from the camp, delving into the shadows at its edge. But the silence remained, and with it now a palpable tension, the air thick with doubt and unease. The stranger returned once again to his perch above the battlefield, and watched as the last of the light fell from the sky, and as the campfires burned themselves out. The rays of morning slowly crept around the camp, like a beast staking his prey, stirring the army to wake. It went some way to renewing the soldiers' hope, but the brothers themselves remained silent, as if they had absorbed all the doubt and despair their followers carried the previous night. Camp was broken, and the retinue continued its journey further still towards the heart of these dark lands. Despite the meeting with the stranger, the brothers still had their purpose, and even though they now knew its full extent, they continued bravely on, resigned to their fate. Chapter 3: Ruination. Yet more battles followed that fated night, the enemy growing in number and strength, the stranger now clearly visible in his observation of them, no longer bothering to conceal his presence. The brothers, though, continued to fight, as heroes among men. Yet they slowed. They erred. Aram's spells would begin to miss. Darek's strength declined, and Guthan weakened by the day. Carol no longer managed to stay the blows of his targets, his brothers receiving wounds before he could fill their enemies with bolts. Torak slowed, and Vurak seemed to instill less fear in his opponents. They bruised and bled, requiring tending from their medics after each skirmish. Now, at the heart of this accursed land, as the sun fell low in the sky, the stranger watched again as they pitched their final camp, watched as they rested, and watched as the martial forces of their army crashed upon the camp. Demons, wolves, hounds, undead creatures, and other such horrors. The brothers fought bravely one last time, rallying their troops to them, fending off the dread beast's raid. Many men fell around them, yet, despite their losses, together, they managed to set the enemy to retreat, striking a heavy blow in return. At first light, the camp was refortified, but the brothers fell around their campfire. All morn and eve, they were tended upon once more. This time, though, they did not recover. Muttering feverishly, their wounds did not close and their breathing weakened. Even in the act of dying, they fought against the darkness, clinging to all the life they could. But much as the sun above giving way to night, so too was their fate, inevitable. As the last rays of light failed, so too did the brothers and the campaign with them. Sorrow and despair now afflicted the camp. The remaining officers came to the realization that without their leaders, they were lost, and must now turn back if there were to be any hope of survival. But as a reflection of the brothers' bravery, they vowed to honor their martyred heroes as a final act before retreating. For 6 days, the survivors dug up the earth and built crypts for the brothers. For 6 nights, their enemies surrounded the camp, chiding and braying, mocking the loss of their leaders, breaking their spirit, but not attacking. The stranger took no joy from this. He had no love for the other side. His involvement was already complete. On the last day, he watched the crypts being covered, and the burial mounds completed, and the remnants of the brothers' army turned their back on the dark to begin their long journey home. As they passed from view, he turned, again, walking deliberately and slowly towards the brothers, now dead and interred in their barrows. Arms outstretched atop the central mound, the stranger chanted some foul, ancient language, casting his old magic. A vulgar purple light formed in front of him, which fell to the earth and bled into each of the barrows. So there we go. That is the Barrows Brothers in a nutshell. That is their story. That is everything you need to know about these bad boys. So these fellas were alive during the Third Age, and basically they led the campaign into Morytania to try and fight back and liberate it from Draken's forces, which not long prior to this actually took over the Icians, which were Saradominus' main followers. However, they did ultimately fail, but they were immensely powerful. The legends of the Barrows Brothers are still alive and well today, and you would do well to be wary of these 6 immensely powerful warriors. This war, or this campaign, was one of the most successful campaigns for Saradominists during the Third Age, if not the most successful. Although eventually it failed, it was not fully completed, it is still probably one of the most successful actual fights Saradominus had during his time. This was a pinnacle within the history of Geilinor. If, at this point, Sliske, or the hooded stranger, did not turn his back and turn the Barrows Brothers into his own pawns at the time he did, to this day we could have a very, very different thing on our hands. Draken would have been repelled out of Morytania, and the Hallowlands would once again be held by human hands. That could change everything we know today. But as it is, that is what happened, and we must live with the consequences of the past. So that is the story of the Barrows Brothers, and a little bit on what Sliske got up to. So with that said, I hope you all enjoyed this. Next one will either be the Fall of Hallaville or the Sanguinesti Uproar. So we'll see what happens. Hope you all enjoyed, and I will catch you all later. Have a good one.